All right, today we are diving into a genuine historical head-scratcher. It's a puzzle that pits a 19th century religious text against a book that was lost to the Western world for more than 1,000 years. And the weird part? They share some truly startling similarities.
Okay, so let's get right into it. What we have here is this fascinating case that's really a mashup of history, theology, and a bit of detective work. And the clues, well, they're buried deep inside these ancient and not so ancient scriptures.
So this gets us to the core question, the one that's fueled debate for decades. How could a young American farmer, back in 1830, produce this incredibly detailed story about the ancient prophet Enoch that just happens to mirror a text he supposedly couldn't have ever seen? I mean, is that just a wild coincidence, or is something else going on here?
So in one corner, you've got Joseph Smith's account of Enoch, which you'll find in his Book of Moses from 1830. In the other corner, you have the ancient Book of 1 Enoch, a text that was basically a complete mystery to the entire Western world for almost 1,400 years. And that massive time gap is exactly what makes this whole connection so compelling and so controversial. The first, and probably most enduring, explanation for all these similarities isn't something you'd find in a history textbook. It's the idea of divine revelation. For many believers, the answer is pretty straightforward. The texts are similar because they both tap into the same ancient, divine source of truth. Now, the main champion for this view was a scholar named Hugh Nibley, and for him, these parallels weren't just a fun fact or a curiosity. Oh no, they were powerful, testable evidence. He essentially saw the Enoch story as a claim you could actually investigate to prove or disprove Joseph Smith's authority as a prophet. Nibley's argument was this really clever, logical trap for any critics. First, he lay out all the uncanny similarities. Second, and this was the absolute linchpin of his whole argument, he would state that the ancient text was completely and totally inaccessible in 1830s America. So, if both of those things are true, what's the only possible conclusion? For Nibley, it was simple. The story had to have come directly from God. And for a long, long time, that second point, that the text was inaccessible, was the bedrock of the whole revelation argument. It seemed unbreachable. But, as it often happens, recent scholarship has uncovered a piece of evidence that completely changes the conversation. And this is where a contemporary researcher, Salvatore Cirillo, enters the picture. In his thesis, he doesn't actually argue that Smith copied anything. Instead, he goes right for the jugular of Nibley's argument, that crucial premise. He asks a simple but pretty devastating question. Was the ancient Book of Enoch really inaccessible? See, Cirillo's whole rebuttal hangs on this timeline. Yes, 1 Enoch was lost to the West after the 4th century, but it was rediscovered in Ethiopia, and here's the kicker, it was translated into English by a guy named Richard Lawrence in 1821. That's a full 9 years before Joseph Smith wrote his text, so the book wasn't a total ghost after all. Now, this is a really crucial distinction. Cirillo proves the book was available in English, somewhere in the world. What he doesn't prove, what no one has ever been able to prove, is that Joseph Smith ever actually saw it, read it, or even knew that it existed. The door for historical influence is now cracked open, but we're still missing that smoking gun. So with the possibility of access now on the table, the whole debate shifts. We have to move beyond just the timeline and put the texts themselves side by side to see what they actually say. First, let's just acknowledge the parallels, because they're what make this so captivating. Both texts paint Enoch as a great visionary prophet who ascends into heaven. Both have him as a preacher of repentance, warning about a coming judgment. And in one particularly striking parallel, both texts actually feature Enoch weeping over the wickedness of humanity. But when you look past those shared themes, you find differences that are, you could argue, just as profound. In the ancient text, Enoch is mostly a passive visionary, kind of a prophet of doom. In Smith's version, he's this active, charismatic leader who builds a whole righteous city called Zion. The focus of 1 Enoch is that final, wrathful judgment, while the Book of Moses is all about redemption and building a holy community. And this quote right here, this highlights maybe the single biggest theological innovation in Smith's account. The idea of God himself weeping in sorrow for his children, that is a radical departure. This compassionate, empathetic God is completely absent from the wrathful, distant judge you read about in 1 Enoch. We're talking about a completely different theological universe. So, where does all this leave us? We've gone through the case for revelation, the scholarly rebuttal, and we've put the texts head to head. What can we actually say for sure? So here's what the rebuttal really establishes. It proves that Nibley's key claim, total inaccessibility, was wrong. An English version did exist, and that opens the door to the possibility of historical influence. It suggests that ideas about Enoch might have just been kind of in the air, floating around in the intellectual and maybe even esoteric culture of the time.
But then you've got this whole pile of things that are still completely unexplained. There is still zero direct evidence that Joseph Smith ever encountered that 1821 translation. And even if he had, how does that explain these massive doctrinal innovations like the City of Zion or the theology of a weeping God? How could he have taken a scattered apocalyptic text about judgment and woven it into this coherent, optimistic story about building a holy community? And that, right there, is the heart of the Enoch Puzzle. It's a case where the historical evidence opens a door, but it doesn't walk you through it. It dismantles one neat and tidy argument, but it fails to build a conclusive one in its place. And so when that paper trail just goes cold, you're the one left to weigh the evidence for yourself. The unlikely parallels, the profound differences, and all those lingering unanswered questions.